Grandpa stole his first buggy in 1892. I met your grandma pig slopping in 46.
Oh, every Christmas we'd visit my Uncle Fred in prison.
And welcome, America, to America's family history show, Extreme Genes, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. Hey, it is great to be back with you after a couple of weeks off. I went down to Costa Rica, and here's David Lambert. He's off in New York, so I guess we're all traveling right now. Dave, how are things in the Big Apple?
They were excellent. I got to lecture at the New York City History Museum with my colleague Chris Child, and then we jetted off, well, actually took the train to Albany, where I've been at the New York State Capitol, where I walked around where the 1911 fire was, in the very room that it occurred.
Oh, boy. Yeah, well, it's great to be back with you. I mean, I had a great time. I'm very tanned right now. Got to feed monkeys. I would have loved to have brought a suitcase full of iguanas back, but my wife said no. But nonetheless, it was a great time. And what's funny is that everybody down there I was meeting was talking about their families and their ancestry, you know. The tour guides would talk about the original settlers in this area and the Spanish and how he was just kind of a combination of all these people as part of the tour. And then many of the folks who were at my son's wedding, that's what it was a destination wedding, they were bringing up things. And so I'd ask, well, did you try DNA? Did you do this? And everybody suddenly is talking family history. It's like there's no vacation from this. And I don't know that I would take it any other way because it's so much fun.
Well, I'm going to have a story probably in the next week or two. If all goes well, I may have solved a mystery here in Albany that they've never been certain about, and I stumbled across it yesterday.
Interesting.
So more on that very shortly.
All right. What do you have for us in Family Histoire news, Dave?
Well, thanks to the efforts of FGS, the Federation of Genealogical Societies, and now their successor, NGS, the National Genealogical Society, they have contracted with Ancestry in the United States Archives in Washington to resume digitizing the War of 1812 pension files.
Ooh.
And the nice thing about that is that they almost had finished, but they're now going to do SJ through U, and they hope to start it up sometime this year.
Excellent. That's good news because that's been going on a long time.
It has, but now it looks like they're back on full speed, which is exciting news. I'll tell you, murder is an interesting thing, and that news story you told me about the 16-year-old is interesting. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, Leslie Arnold was his name back in 1958. This kid wanted to take his girlfriend out on a date, go to the movies, but Mom wouldn't let him take the car. So he shot Mom and Dad and went to the movie with his girlfriend, and then went back home and buried them in the backyard. Well, after a couple of weeks of them being missing, you know, people came snooping around, and the police kind of put the whole thing together. They arrested him. He showed where he'd buried the bodies. They put him in prison. So about 9 years later, he and a fellow inmate engineered an escape from this prison in Nebraska, and they both wound up in Chicago. One got caught, but Leslie Arnold disappeared, and they were never able to find him. So here's an investigator who took up the cold case here just a few years ago, went and visited this guy's brother in Canada, got a DNA sample, put it on a database, and they actually found Leslie Arnold's son over in Australia. And as it turns out, Leslie passed away back in 2010, but they were able to put the whole story together and trace him under a fictitious name. And the family had no idea. He was a great father, a great husband, raised these kids. Obviously, he did not let it define him, although you would think that might be something that would do that.
You would think so. Well,
yeah.
That is amazing. Given a new sense of genealogy for the family.
Yeah.
I'm sure he didn't tell the kids, by the way, I murdered your grandparents. One story that really warmed my heart is a gentleman who's 100 years old, John Wenzel, as many of our World War II veterans are. He person involved in bombing the Nazis during World War II in the Air Force, the Army Air Corps, actually. And poor guy is suffering from nightmares.
Yeah, and it didn't happen until he was 99 years old, all this time. So he's been actually counseled to start opening up about his experiences, and he's telling his stories now to his kids and grandkids, and the nightmares have gone away.
Well, that's a wonderful news, and we're very blessed to have so many of our veterans still with us from that generation.
Not many. That article says we're down to 99% of the people who fought in World War II are gone now.
New York, with Robert Fulton and the invention of the steamboats, this modern invention, became another way of sort of drag racing, if you will. But in the 19th century, steamboats would have races against each other or try to beat records, and they would blow up.
Yeah.
Or they'd overload. I mean, the Sultana disaster from 1865 with prisoners of war who were not even strong enough to swim, 1,800 individuals perished.
Yeah.
And you had a relative, I think, that was killed
in a steamboat.
On the Henry Clay.
Yeah, the Henry Clay in 1852. It was going up the Hudson River, and apparently the captain started racing another ship. He later denied it, but all the survivors were saying, no, he was actually going for it and just picking up more and more steam. The thing caught on fire, and there were, I think it was 80 people killed on that, including a former mayor of New York who was part of it. Mm-hmm. But it was a relative, not a direct ancestor. But it was interesting to learn about that. And then when you find out about these historic events, that there's some personal connection to it. It's amazing. And by the way, you can read about this in Smithsonian Magazine online.
I have some Welsh ancestry, and I thought I would share with you a fun little place name story. So in Wales, when the Saxons arrived, they asked the local Welsh what was the name of a particular hill. Well, the Welsh word for hill is pen, like P-E-N. So they called it Torp, which is Saxon for hill. So it was called Torpen. Essentially, that would be hill.
Yeah.
Now, the Norse arrive and ask the same local Welsh, what do you call this? Hill. But the Norse word for hill is Holger. So it became Torpen Holger. So it became hill. Well, later on, when the English came by, they just added hill to Torpenhow. And so now it's Torpenhow Hill, which is essentially hill, and await hill.
Oh,
hill
wow.
Times 4.
All right, David, thank you so much. Of course, you're going to be back at the back end of the show for more of Ask Us Anything. And coming up next, we're going to talk to Crista Cowan from our friends over at Ancestry.com, talking about artificial intelligence. Where does she see it going? Coming up next in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Hi, Genies. Fisher here, and I hear from so many of you all the time that I love all those family stories on Extreme Genes. Where can I find ancestor stories like those? The best answer? Digitized newspapers. And nobody has more digitized newspaper pages than newspapers.com. Newspapers.com has well over 800 million searchable pages from the United States and countries all over the world. Find those valuable obituaries and marriage accounts, often with photographs. Read your ancestors' funny stories, sad stories, and sometimes shocking stories. It was from newspapers.com that I learned about how my grandfather rescued a boy from a flooded lake during World War II. In another account, I learned that my wife's ancestor ran off with the wife of a farmhand and stole over $20,000 in the process. Newspapers.com is like that box of chocolates we always hear about. You never know what you're going to get. What will you find? Sign up now at newspapers.com.
Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree? Are you unsure how to use your DNA test results to resolve a research question? Do you want to travel where your ancestors walked and need to find details before you go? Need help joining a lineage society? Whatever your genealogy research question, the answer is Legacy Tree Genealogist. Legacy Tree Genealogist has been helping clients all over the globe discover their story since 2004. Legacy Tree has carefully selected and trained professionals who specialize in hundreds of countries and languages, as well as probate research and DNA analysis. And when you need experts on the ground in the countries where your ancestors came from, Legacy Tree Genealogists calls upon its global network of on-site researchers who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. That's legacytree.com.
Hey Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow Genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. All right, it's Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, and my next guest is no stranger to anybody in our field. She is the lovely Crista Cowan from our friends over at Ancestry.com. And Crista, you know, lately everybody's been talking about artificial intelligence. Are we going to actually be able to use this stuff eventually just to do all our work and it's done, do you think?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. Otherwise, we wouldn't get to keep having the fun that we're having.
That's true.
I certainly think it will be an increased benefit in the future.
I would think so. Now, let's just talk about this a little bit because it's coming on strong. I've already talked to some other folks on the show in the last few weeks on their take on this. Have you been using AI in your own personal research? Because I know you do a lot of it.
Yeah, you know what? The sneaky thing is that anybody who uses Ancestry has been using AI. They just might not realize it yet.
Okay, well, let's talk about that for a minute here, because that's been going on for some time, has it not?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, you know, with the rise of ChatGPT, and of course, artificial intelligence is kind of the new, buzzword, and people are focused on that. But artificial intelligence is just simply using computers in a way that allows them to do some machine learning and provide a benefit to us to do something faster. So some of the first use of AI technology at Ancestry was the shaky leaf hints that came out over a decade ago now, where Ancestry is comparing information you enter into your family tree to information in the now 40 billion records on the site to be sure to provide you with hints that we hope are close. Now, of course, those algorithms and that machine learning that artificial intelligence has to do are continually being tweaked and reviewed, and feedback is being put back into the system to make sure that we're delivering the best hints, and there's always room for improvement. But that's kind of one of the advents of AI usage at Ancestry.
Well, I've thought about this, back in the day, back before the turn of the century, we used to look at census records using, what did they call that with the different spellings?
The Soundex.
The Soundex. You remember the Soundex? And I mean, it's almost out of mind at this point, but when we go on any site, everything is kind of automatically Soundexed, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Not only that, we can apply different kinds of Soundex depending on the names. So the AI has gotten smart enough to say, oh, this name looks like a, Eastern European Jewish name. So we can apply the Mokotov version of the Soundex to this particular surname. So yeah, the search algorithms are getting smarter and smarter and able to apply different kinds of that artificial intelligence to the process to provide you with better search results.
Absolutely. And then you guys partnered with Family Search working on the 1950 census, and that was using AI, right?
Yeah, you know what? I love talking about this because it's kind of mind-blowing. And I think this is what we're seeing, right? So AI has kind of had this really long runway to get started, but now I think we're at this inflection point where things are just really going to start taking off.
Yeah.
So if you compare the 1940 census, which was done over a decade ago, it took about 9 months of human indexing and review to get that fully indexed and available. The 1950 census was indexed with artificial intelligence, handwriting recognition technology. Ancestry used a proprietary technology that we created, and we were able to index the entire 1950 census in 9 days.
9 months to 9 days.
Right.
Isn't that insane? And, that was kind of the holy grail for the longest time, to be able to read handwriting. Right.
Right.
And we're there now. And we're not only just doing it in English, we're doing it in other languages. And they're actually figuring out what some languages are saying that were ancient as a result of all this stuff, the analysis of it all.
So, Ancestry has applied that same handwriting recognition technology to some of the older French censuses. And starting June 1st, when the Canadian government releases the 1931 census, for Canada, we'll be using that same technology there.
Wow. And so, boom, by the end of the month, it's all done.
Yep. Maybe by the end of the week.
I know. Isn't that funny? You're all giddy here, and I understand it, because it's just so amazingly cool what we can find these days. What about ChatGPT? Have you played with this at all for any family history purposes yourself?
I have. Yeah, I spent actually quite a bit of time with it. And there's so many applications if you understand its current limitations.
Right.
I've used it to analyze a document that I've transcribed. So I take like an old deed or an old probate file that I've already transcribed, and then dump that transcription into ChatGPT and ask it to analyze or summarize it for me. And it can kind of break it down to the basic elements, which I think for somebody who's a genealogist, a lot of our time is spent in that analysis and kind of interpretation process. And so it just speeds that right up.
So what did it say when you asked it for a summary?
Well, so it can pull out the pertinent facts. And if you ask it to, it can also pull out pertinent relationships. So for example, if I dump the transcription of a will into ChatGPT, I can ask it to tell me who are all the relatives and what is their relationship to the deceased. And, it will say, this is the spouse, these are the children, this is the executors, this is and it'll just, I can ask it to present it in list form. And so it can give me that kind of a breakdown without me having to go through and extract all of that information line by line.
So this is still the Model T version of AI, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So my question to you is then, did you go back and analyze it to see how accurate it was?
So I did. Yeah, I've compared a few things. And the key is to get the right prompt, to ask it to do the right thing in the right format, and then to give you the right output. So as long as you tell it to do those things and you give it the input, it can do it accurately. So if you compare the output to the input, it's accurate. Where I find ChatGPT is still kind of in its infancy and maybe needs a little work is if you ask it for original thought. I can't feed in my grandfather's birth date and death date and say, write me a biography about him. It will, but that will not likely be accurate.
Right. And I've seen this for some things. I'm working on a novel right now, and there are so many details about the time and place. I ask it about those things, and it gives me some great information, but I don't trust it enough yet for materials like that to know that it's 100% accurate. In fact, I've had to go back and scold it a couple of times and say, no, you got this. And it apologizes, which is, I'm sorry, we're working on getting better, and so it's fascinating. Where do you think this is going ultimately? I mean, especially with things interactive AI like chat.
Yeah, here at Ancestry, we're actually exploring some of those things with some of our engineers. And right now where we're seeing it have a huge benefit is with some of our writers. So people who are doing blog writing, people who are doing marketing copy, people who are doing genealogical reports. Again, as long as you give it the right input, you can ask for edited or creative output. So it can change the language, it can simplify the language, it can adjust the language, it can flower it up if you want it to do that. And I love that for those of us who in the genealogy space are writers who are trying to craft narratives around the stories of our ancestors' lives. Not everybody is a writer,
right?
But as long as you give it the right information, it can help with that writing process and speed that up, which for professional genealogists is also, I think, a huge boon. Professional genealogists spend large chunks of their client research hours doing that writing process.
Yes.
And so this, I think, can speed that up quite a bit. But ultimately, if we can get the ChatGPT-like tools connected to large databases and information to improve its accuracy, I think the sky's the limit. I think we can see all sorts of exciting things coming out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking as you were saying all this, timelines, very important, but you are already doing that with AI, right?
Yep.
On Ancestry. And I love it because to me, timelines really tell the story of anybody's life, right? All the materials, what happened when, and trying to tie that into other people. I think where it could be very interesting is, say you had a family of 5 and you had a timeline on each individual. What if you could tie those timelines together and then you start to get some kind of sense of the interaction of the family members and what they were doing?
Well, yeah. And then you think about this, like if you take it a step further, what if there was an entire database full of relevant local, national, global, historical, and cultural facts that you could import or move into that timeline at will, right? So instead of it being imposed upon you or somebody shoving something into your family story, you can say, well, based on what I know, I can pull these events into that timeline. That again can start to create a real picture of who those people were and the experiences that they lived.
I'm just so fascinated by this whole thing, and I'm hearing from all kinds of people with different ways they're trying to use it. I know Kurt Witcher from the Allen County Public Library was talking about using this, of course, with archive.org, and how much faster they're getting now at getting books up. I mean, it's just an astonishing thing, what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, if you think about it, it's like I get super excited because I like to speculate. So, don't take this as official ancestry words. But when you think about all of the old local and family histories that were written and have been published, and many of them have been digitized and available online, but there's gold mines of information just trapped in those books because the indexing of them was done with old OCR technology.
Right.
Now, if we can apply new AI technology to that, we can take a family history book, for example, and what if we could extract family trees from those narratives? So instead of going from a tree to a narrative, which some of us are using ChatGPT to do, could we take old narratives and turn them into trees that then help people make additional discovery?
She is Crista Cowan with our good friends over at Ancestry.com. Crista, thank you so much for your time. Really interesting conversation, and it's going to be fascinating when we talk about this again, say, next year or the year after that, just where we are.
Yep, I can't wait to see.
And coming up next, Ryan Rockwood is going to join us from Legacy Tree Genealogist, talking about Asian research and a fascinating case study he did actually in college that got him going on this. You're going to want to hear it coming up next in 5 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, back to work. It's Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, with my next guest. He's a project manager for our sponsors over at Legacy Tree Genealogists. He's an Asian research specialist. He covers the Japanese. He covers the Koreans. He covers the Chinese. He's Ryan Rockwood. And Ryan, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much. Always great to be back.
I was just thinking about some of the stories you've told me over the years, and of course how you got started over at Brigham Young University. What was your major?
So I majored in Japanese, but then I also had a minor in family history and then another minor in international business.
And look at how that has all tied together in your life at this point.
So I had no choice.
You had no choice, exactly right. But you have a great story to tell about one of your research projects in school. I thought it would be really interesting to share with everybody because you tracked this guy who came from Japan way before the usual immigration to America, that period in the 1920s up till the war. And what got you interested in this man? How did you find him? What was the tale? And how did you make these discoveries?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to focus in on Japanese history and people of Japanese descent, but I also needed to get my minor at BYU in family history, and in order to do that, I had to take a Southern U.S. family history class. And so I was talking with professors, and I was saying, hey, do you think there's any chance that we had some Japanese people that lived in the South in this time period? And I had a professor who said, probably no chance at all, but maybe you can search and find someone. So I honestly I just did an ethnicity search in the 1900 census in Texas, and I found this individual, and that just exploded into something much greater.
So this was your minor, but you were a Japanese major, so you were just bonding them together, and you found this guy. So there's your subject. Where did it go from there?
Exactly. So yeah, once I found him, I was just excited to have anyone at all, and so I just started researching more to try to figure out why was this guy even there. And so it was pretty incredible to see. His name is Seito Saibata. He was born in 1860 in Japan. This is kind of in a time in Japanese history where they had just gone out in over 200 years of this kind of secluded period where all of their borders were closed off to the outside world, which is kind of crazy for us to think of the entire country closed off for over 200 years. But in 1860 was just coming out of this where they had opened up, and so they had a lot of Western influence, and that they were kind of learning about how the world was working and adopting things, and also sending out delegates to share what they were doing. And so there was a lot of this kind of Western fervor throughout the country. And during this time, Seito Saibata was born. He went to an English school. He ended up adopting Christianity. So he kind of had a lot of Western ideals that were really new at the time. And that prompted him to eventually, he wanted to visit America, to actually visit a Christian theology school in Hartford, Connecticut. And so,
really?
Yeah, so in the early 1900s, there's this Japanese man from a little prefecture that's now in Hartford, Connecticut, learning more about Christianity. And it was during that theology visit that he decided he wanted to live the rest of his life there, primarily to grow rice and silk. And he settled on Webster, Texas, so right outside of Houston, as the place that he wanted to start his family and kind of start a new life for him.
That's incredible. A real adventurer, and there are those types of people in all of our lines, but it's really interesting to hear it from somebody coming over here from the Far East, actually. So it's pretty amazing. But things didn't really go very well for this guy, as I understand it.
Unfortunately, no. I mean, at first it certainly did. The agricultural pursuits that he had, he was able to be very well accomplished. He even created a bit of a Japanese Christian community there in Webster. I was looking at some aggregate census data, and there was 13 Japanese people in the county in the year of 1900. But by 1910, there was 340 people in the county of Japanese descent. And so he kind of ushered in a bit of a boom and created a Japanese colony there, and really had a bit of an agricultural empire that he wanted to move to Alabama to start a nursery there and all these things. But then in 1924, it was the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act, obviously put a clamp down that no one of Asian descent was allowed to immigrate to the U.S., which also trickled down into, a lot of hardship for those of Asian descent that were already here. And so as a result, he actually had to move to Brazil. And so he went to Brazil and then tried to play the same song there, try to make a bit of an agricultural empire in Brazil as well. But then, unfortunately, in those later years, started bouncing around from country to country dealing with illness. And so it's like a lot of our pioneer heritage, that maybe have more of a Western heritage here in the U.S.
Yeah.
It's always good to hear that there's some similarities in some of the pioneer heritage of everybody.
Well, there are similarities in pretty much every culture. We just don't often look for those things. We see the differences and find them interesting, but the similarities can be as well. So this man then ultimately wound up back here in the United States. How did that happen?
Yeah, so after he went to Brazil and the employment opportunities didn't pan out, he ended up going to Formosa, so modern-day Taiwan, and then back to Tokyo. And it was while he was in Tokyo in the mid-1930s that he actually fell quite ill. And it was also during around that time where some of the restrictions had loosened, so he, at that point, came back to Texas. He lived his last year and a half with his family in Texas, because at that point he had a child that stayed, so his son was still living in the U.S. By that point, he had grandchildren there in the U.S. His wife had actually come back to the U.S. by that point, so he lived the last year and a half of his life there in Texas and eventually passed away. But it's kind of beautiful because his legacy has certainly lived on. Like I said, his son then had a lot of agricultural pursuits in Texas and New Mexico, and the story's not finished yet, but I was able to track down even a great-great-great-grandson of his through social media. So this one immigrant, he's got great-great-great-grandchildren that completed degrees at Texas A&M and LSU and are still, living in the southern United States. And it's amazing to see, the legacy of this one individual.
Yeah, it's a great American story, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. So how did you find a lot of this information? You obviously tracked this one man down through an ethnicity research project at the turn of the century. Where did it go from there?
Yeah, so a lot of it at the very beginning was I'd say pretty similar to a lot of people tracking down an immigrant ancestor. So obviously leveraged the initial census documents from when they were first here. Then I went back through, some ship manifests. He specifically came through Canada and then came down from Canada into the U.S. So there was records documenting all of that, which was very helpful. But then one of the real gold mines, which was incredible to find, was I did some searches, some academic articles, both in the U.S. and actually in Japan, and I did some searches in Japanese. I knew he was a prominent individual in Japan. I imagine he must have been quite a story coming to America when he did, so I wondered if there was anything published in Japan about his life in America. And sure enough, there was actually a professor of one of the universities over there that had such an interest in him that he compiled his diary and then translated it into English, which I can read Japanese, but let me tell you, that was a really good sight to see when I knew I didn't have to strain too hard to read it. So
wow, what a story, and what a great way to learn your craft, Ryan, as you have, and that's why you are the project manager for overseeing all the Asian research for Legacy Tree. So thanks so much for taking us through that. It was really interesting stuff, and we look forward to having you on the show again sometime down the line.
Of course. Like I said, always a pleasure. Thanks again.
And coming up next, David Allen Lambert returns as we do another round of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Hey Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. Hi, Genies. Fisher here, and I hear from so many of you all the time that I love all those family stories on Extreme Genes. Where can I find ancestor stories like those? The best answer? Digitized newspapers. And nobody has more digitized newspaper pages than newspapers.com. Newspapers.com has well over 800 million searchable pages from the United States and countries all over the world. Find those valuable obituaries and marriage accounts, often with photographs. Read your ancestors' funny stories, sad stories, and sometimes shocking stories. It was from newspapers.com that I learned about how my grandfather rescued a boy from a flooded lake during World War II. In another account, I learned that my wife's ancestor ran off with the wife of a farmhand and stole over $20,000 in the process. Newspapers.com is like that box of chocolates we always hear about. You never know what you're going to get. What will you find? Sign up now at newspapers.com.
Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree? Are you unsure how to use your DNA test results to resolve a research question? Do you want to travel where your ancestors walked and need to find details before you go? Need help joining a lineage society? Whatever your genealogy research question, the answer is Legacy Tree Genealogist. Legacy Tree Genealogist has been helping clients all over the globe discover their story since 2004. Legacy Tree has carefully selected and trained professionals who specialize in hundreds of countries and languages, as well as probate research and DNA analysis. And when you need experts on the ground in the countries where your ancestors came from, Legacy Tree Genealogists calls upon its global network of on-site researchers who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. That's legacytree.com.
All right, we're back for Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. Fisher here. David Allen Lambert is back from the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org on the road in Albany, New York. Doing a little work there, David. And our first question today is from Kelvin in Santa Cruz, New Mexico. And Kelvin writes, "Gentlemen, welcome back. Question: I have a ton of old pictures I need to digitize. Is there an ideal way to do this in large numbers?" That's a good question a lot of people ask.
I know, and I do it by hand because I'm picky. There are places, including like Family Search, where you can bring your photos in batches. Now, have you ever done that before? And have them do a whole pile?
Yeah, I've done it with some of my wife's pictures, and she went down and ran them. And we found actually that some of the scanners are better than others. And there was one batch that came in, and it kind of had some light lines on it. Now, I can't speak to it and say, oh, this is the case in every Family Search center that there's going to be some issue. But it's certainly worth looking into, because if you can rip through a whole pile of them fast, and then you can go through maybe and improve them using Photoshop or going to MyHeritage or something like that, that would be a great start to a large pile of photographs.
Oh, don't even get me started with all the things you can do with MyHeritage. You can make great-great-grandma sing. I mean, it's like...
Yes.
The idea of backing them up. Scanning is great because then you can put them in the cloud. You can burn them onto a thumb drive. Not burn them, I suppose that's burning a CD. But copy them onto a thumb drive and share it or keep it in some place so you don't have the sole copy of the photo.
Yeah, that's right. And, there's so many people today that only want to look at photos digitally, right? On their phones, online, wherever it may be. Obviously, it makes for a great storage place to put them on Family Search, to put them on Ancestry, to put them on MyHeritage, wherever that might be, that people can find them later. And, it's funny because also a lot of people today do not want to inherit piles and piles of photo albums. They'll just wind up, in many cases, in the trash. But if you've digitized them and made them available and made them beautiful online, at least the digitals may survive, even if the physicals do not.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking alone of all the Instamatic photos, like Kodak Instamatic, that are still developing within the chemical process under the emulsion. I mean, they're developing away.
Yes.
I mean, they're like almost fading. So, people are worried about their 1800s photographs. I say, get to the ones from the 70s and the 80s and get those scanned before they're gone.
No, I think you're right. I think the ones from the 19th century are actually holding up in many cases much better than those from the mid-20th century.
Very true. I think those daguerreotypes are going to probably be a long time after we're all gone. But those Kodak pictures, you might live longer.
Well, and this is the thing, too. With Photoshop, you can take some of those faded pictures or the ones that are just turning into faded yellow or something. You can clean that up. And one of the best ways you can do that with Photoshop or Adobe Photoshop Elements is to completely remove any color, and then start darkening it and giving it contrast and saving it, and then do it again and again and again. And then you can fix any tears that might be in it, and you can completely restore these things. And then even though it might not have color, you could actually have MyHeritage add color to it.
It's pretty amazing. And like I say, just what you can do with your cell phone alone, with taking a picture of an old photo, cropping it, emailing it, sending it to 20 cousins and just a keystroke, is amazing.
Yeah, all kinds of options available for you now. So, Kelvin, if you want to go for it, first of all, check out the Family Search centers. See if you can find a machine that will satisfactorily do your pile quickly, and then have fun with those. And if it's not to your satisfaction, slow down and just do a few at a time at home by hand. And in time, you're going to have an amazing collection of photographs. And best of luck to you. All right. And coming up next, we have another question on Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, in 3 minutes. All right, back at it for our final question this week on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. Next question, Dave, is from Drew in Key Biscayne, Florida. He says, Dave and Fish, did factory work in World War II change security in factories afterwards? Interesting question. I wish he had explained to us what he's working on, what he's thinking about here, Dave.
Well, I can tell you from my dad in World War II, he worked in the shipyard in Boston, and he had to go to the customs house to get his papers to work in the shipyard, essentially getting a security clearance. And this is not military. This is a civilian worker.
Sure.
And I've always wanted to track those records down. But my dad later worked for Northrop Grumman into the 50s, and because that was later aerospace tied into the Mercury and Apollo missions, he always had some form of security clearance and photo ID for all the different places he had to go into to work. So the problem is finding the paperwork. But if it's federal, you would think our friends at the FBI might be able to help out.
Boy, that's a good question. We just found out, I think a year or so ago, that my wife's great-grandparents worked at a munitions factory in Indiana. That all came as a result of seeing the name of the employer of her great-grandmother on her Social Security card from during the war. And we looked up who the company was and found out they were running this munitions factory there, and they'd actually set up a town to house the workers. And the stories behind it are that they had to go through clearance every time they went through a doorway in this place. It was really tight. And so I'm thinking the same way as you, Dave. There had to have been some kind of record created that the government may still have that Freedom of Information could bring to us.
Right. I mean, you and I both love eBay. Just do a quick search on employee IDs from like the World War II era. I have one for a factory worker in my hometown of Stoughton. After the war, they made golf spikes, but they were making military contracts, as many of these factories were. And it's like a mugshot, Fish. It's got like his height in inches and feet behind him, and he doesn't have a name on the ID. He has a number. So it's almost like you couldn't get their identity if someone stole the ID. And these show up on eBay. I mean, they go for anywhere from $20 to $100, depending on the company. And there are people that collect these things. I'm sure Maureen Taylor probably has some of these photo IDs. But think of it, if you had a relative that worked on the Manhattan Project, there's got to be oodles of paperwork, in background checks and things like that. So, yeah, if you're working in World War II, even if you're in a factory that was a government contract, you don't want to be in there spying for Germany or Japan. They want to know who you are. So it wasn't just like, hey, Charlie, you want to come in and get a job? They probably did a little bit of checking.
Oh, no question. No question. I wonder, before World War II, what people did in factories at that time. And certainly we had military factories prior to the war. I wonder if it was that tight prior to World War II. That'd be interesting to find out.
There may have been. I mean, I know that if you look at like conductors, like railroad conductors and things like that, they always had a numbered badge. Fire badges had numbers on them.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, so the idea of an identified badge is a 19th century element anyways.
Yep.
But, I mean, the idea of adding the photo element to it made it, it's yours, and you just didn't grab somebody's badge off of a coffee shop table and decide to go in and spy on what's going on, So I love these questions our listeners give us because it gives us a sense of like, what else is there out there for our own family we can look for? So look for those photo IDs and badges and, for your own genealogy. Yeah, you may have hated that company you left, but that photo ID is a genealogical clue for that company you hated.
Absolutely,
so
right.
You might save it.
All right, David, thank you so much. We'll talk to you next time around.
All right, I'll be back in Beantown by then.
All right, my friend. And thank you for listening to the show this week. If you missed any of it, of course, catch the podcast. You can do it on iHeartRadio, Apple Media, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, or extremegenes.com. We'll talk to you again next week. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.